Hello and welcome back to Humans and Society. This lesson focuses on the topic freedom and responsibility from the subject Introduction to the Philosophy of the Human Person. Before we continue, let us look at the objectives of this lesson. At the end of the lesson, a student must be able to identify the different concepts related to the understanding of human freedom, explain the relationship between human freedom and obligation, distinguish human actions from acts of man, distinguish intellectual choice from practical choice, and apply concepts to hypothetical situations. Over the past few weeks, we have discussed the following topics: the meaning and branches of philosophy, truth and knowledge, argumentation and fallacies, the human person as an embodied spirit, and the human person in the environment. Who are these people? Do you know? The first man is the founder of Katipunan. The second one is the liberator of South America. The third is the first president of the United States of America. And the fourth is a 2021 Nobel Peace Prize awardee. I will give you 5 seconds to think. Time's up. The first person is Andres Bonifacio. I'm sure all of you got that one correct. The second one is Simon Bolivar. The third is George Washington. And the fourth is Maria Ressa. These 4 people have one thing in common, and they all fought for freedom. Freedom is one of the most abused and misunderstood words, especially during this time. It is a well-loved concept that ancestors fought for, yet poorly understood by the present generation. People associate freedom with the ability to do whatever they want to do. There are so many notions about freedom. Some claim to be free means to do anything regardless of the outcome. Others say it is the ability to exercise one's will towards the good. And there are those that say there is no such thing as freedom, and that we are all governed by natural law. Let us try this activity. You spend the eve of your final exams studying. However, most of the things you reviewed are not included in the test, and you are on the verge of failing. Your best friend and seatmate notices your distress and removes her hand from her paper so you can clearly see her answers. What would you do? This is an example of a question involving freedom and responsibility. In understanding freedom, it is important to emphasize the dynamic relationship between choices and consequences. Choice is the ability to voluntarily decide to perform one of several possible acts or to avoid action entirely, while consequence is the outcome derived from a choice. It is the natural result of an action or inaction. Every choice has a corresponding consequence. Man cannot escape the consequences of their choices. Choice is our freedom, but consequence is our responsibility. There are 2 kinds of actions done by man: acts of man and human acts. An act of man is an act that man performs but does not consciously control or deliberately will. Therefore, he is not the master of it, and subsequently not responsible for it. For example, if I touch an object and feel pain or heat, I will remove my hand from that object. That is an act of man. Acts of man also includes acts that pertain to instruments of sensation and appetite. Eating, sleeping, and copulation are all acts of man. Crying when sad or laughing when tickled are also acts of man. Acts of man are shared by all humans and other animals. Human acts are actions done consciously and deliberately, making man a master of these actions and consequently responsible for them. Human acts are done by choice using reason or emotions. Feeling hunger and choosing not to eat is a human act. Other examples are saving people, going to church, telling someone you love them, committing a crime, studying for a test, and creating artwork. Human acts may be voluntary or involuntary. Voluntary acts result from a person's choice to perform the action using knowledge about the situation or action. All the examples I stated earlier are voluntary acts. A voluntary act may result from compulsion when you are given options between an action you don't want to do or a consequence you don't want to get. For example, an employee may falsify documents for the company when his boss threatens to fire him if he doesn't. It is a voluntary choice because he doesn't want to get fired. Involuntary acts in science refer to bodily functions over which we have little to no control, like breathing, bowel movements, blinking, or reflexes. Involuntary acts in philosophy are acts done through force or by ignorance resulting in remorse over the consequences of the action. An involuntary act under compulsion or force means you were not given a choice. The circumstances are beyond your control, and that is the only course of action. Acts done because of extortion, blackmail, torture, or assault are examples of involuntary acts under coercion. An involuntary act through ignorance results from failing to understand the particular situation. However, ignorance of a major premise does not classify an act as involuntary. For example, stealing involves taking someone else's property. That is the major premise. The knowledge that an object is someone else's property is the particular situation. It is an involuntary act if the person doesn't know that the object he took belongs to someone else. If a person doesn't know the concept of stealing, but does know the object belongs to someone else and takes it anyway, it is a serious moral flaw, but it is still stealing. It is not an involuntary act. Voluntary human acts are subject to ethics because of our mastery over them and the choice to do them. Involuntary acts are usually not subject to moral scrutiny because of the lack of mastery or choice to do them. Choice is exclusively human because of our capacity to reason. There are two types of choices man can make. Voluntary acts are decided through intellectual choice or practical choice. Intellectual choice is based on the moral system of our society. It reflects the values that we believe the people around us also have. Intellectual choice is what we give when asked about ideas and behaviors that is accepted in our society. Practical choice is the choice we make based on our personal, psychological, and emotional state. We make practical choices when faced with an actual situation that presents a moral dilemma. One's intellectual choice, when presented with a theoretical situation, may not always match his practical choice when presented with the same situation in real life. Let us go back to the situation at the beginning of the lesson involving cheating. For your intellectual choice, you would say that cheating is wrong and you will never do it. But your practical choice, when you find yourself in that actual situation, might say, you need to pass this test and you will take a peek if you're sure you would not get caught. Throughout history, several philosophers have talked about freedom and responsibility. For Aristotle, freedom is based on reason. A human being is rational. Reason is a divine characteristic. If there were no reason, there would be no will. Reason can legislate, but it is only through will that legislation can turn into action. Our will is an instrument of free choice. Reason, will, and action work together as a system. St. Thomas Aquinas talks about spiritual freedom. Of all the creatures of God, humans have the unique power to change their surroundings for the better. Human beings are moral agents because we have both body and spirit. Our spirit separates us from animals. Through our spirit, we have a conscience. Whether we choose to be good or evil becomes our responsibility. Jean-Paul Sartre talks about individual freedom. Sartre emphasizes the importance of free individual choice, regardless of the power of other people to influence our desires, beliefs, and decisions. To be human, to be conscious, is to be free to imagine, free to choose, and be responsible for one's life. Thomas Hobbes, in his book The Leviathan, talked about the law of nature, established by reason, by which a person is forbidden to do that which is destructive with his life. This is the law of self-preservation. The first law of nature states that in order to preserve the self, man should seek peace. The second law of nature states that people mutually give up certain rights in order to achieve peace. This mutual transfer of rights is called a contract, and is the basis for moral obligation and duty. The only thing man does not give up is his right to self-defense, because it is his sole motive for entering the contract. The third law of nature is that humans abide by the contract they made. This law is the basis for justice. If there is no contract, no action is unjust. Because there is a contract, to break it is unjust. The three laws of nature are unable to reach peace by themselves alone. Hobbes thinks that to end the continuous, self-destructive condition of war, humans founded a state with the sovereign power of control by means of mutual consent. Man gives up his freedom in exchange for security and peace. In his book, The Social Contract, Jean-Jacques Rousseau elaborated his theory of human nature. Like Hobbes, Rousseau believes that the state owes its origin to a social contract freely entered into by its members. However, he believes that human beings are born free and good. He becomes bad due to the evil influence of society, civilization, learning, and progress. He learns dissent, conflict, fraud, and deceit. The human loses his original goodness. In order to restore peace, bring his freedom back, and return to his true self, man found it necessary to form a state through the social contract, where everyone grants his individual will to the general will. Ayn Rand said that freedom is to ask nothing, to expect nothing, and to depend on nothing. Human beings have rights, but they also have responsibilities. The only system that upholds individual rights is capitalism. It espouses the right to gain, to keep, and to dispose of material values. It is contended that the individual should be disciplined from within, rather than from fear of authority. Discipline and responsibility is inculcated through education. Individualism, according to Rand, is aligned with family. Individual needs community, and a community needs individuals. François-Marie Arouet, more popularly known as Voltaire, fought for religious tolerance and freedom of speech. Because of his beliefs, he was jailed and exiled several times from his home country of France. He was famous for saying, "I may not agree with what you say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it." B.F. Skinner is a psychologist. His study on behavior led to his theory on operant conditioning, which states that man's actions can be influenced by manipulating his environment and providing a series of positive and negative reinforcements. The question of freedom arises as how can man be free if he can be controlled? Skinner argues that even though behavior can be determined, it is better that the person feels free or believes he is free. When a person wants something, he acts to get it. The feeling of freedom is simply the consciousness of freedom, or merely the knowledge of having acted on one's own desires. The absence of control expresses itself on the feeling that one could also choose not to act on his desires. It is not true that life just happens to us. We believe that some things are meant to be, and some things can be different. We can make things different, and we are responsible for the things we can change. On the other end of the spectrum, we have David Hume, who talked about determinism. According to Hume, all physical events have been determined by the sum total of all prior events. There is no such thing as freedom of choice unless there is freedom to refuse. In summary, freedom has many facets. It can be political, economic, spiritual, intellectual, behavioral, and moral. Individual freedom means mastery of our actions and having the ability to make choices. Freedom has the accompanying responsibility of accepting the consequences of our choices. In order to be truly free, we should look past our self-interests and be in commune with other people, with nature, and with God. This is the main performance task assigned to you this week. The trolley problem is a thought experiment developed in the 1960s, where participants are given a series of ethical dilemmas involving sacrificing one person to save many. An article about this was published in the 1970s, and it has evolved into a subject in its own right. Although earlier versions have been found to exist as early as the 1900s, many variations of the trolley problem have been developed throughout the decades. For our purposes, we are going to use the version bystander at the switch. Please note that there is no exact right answer to this activity. This is meant to challenge you into reflecting about your thoughts and feelings about the situation, and how far and how creative you will go to explain your decision. Bystander at the switch goes like this. There is a runaway trolley barreling down the railway tracks. Ahead, on the tracks, there are 5 people, tied up and unable to move. The trolley is headed straight for them. You are standing some distance off the train yard, next to a lever. If you pull this lever, the trolley will switch to a different set of tracks. However, you notice that there is one person on the side track. You have 2 options. Do nothing and allow the trolley to kill 5 people in the main track. Or pull the lever, diverting the trolley onto the side track where it will kill 1 person. To process your answer, you will need to consider the following questions. Was there freedom on your part in facing the situation? What are your considerations for saying that your choice is the right thing? Following the concept of intellectual choice, will your decision be the same? Why or why not? Following the concept of practical choice, will your decision be the same? Why or why not? Was your decision a choice based on your understanding or based on some reference? This activity and the process questions can be found on page 16 to 17 of your module. I hope you understood the concepts of freedom and responsibility. Let us do a short assessment of your understanding. Categorize the following actions as act of man voluntary human act or involuntary human act. Number 1. Daydreaming while in class or work. Number 2. Choosing where and what to eat for lunch. Number 3. Paying ransom to a kidnapper. Number 4. Waving away a fly buzzing near your ear. Number 5. Falling in love. Number 6. Evacuating your home because of natural disaster. Finished? Let us see the correct answers. Number 1 is an act of man. We have no control over daydreaming. Number 2 is a voluntary human act. It involves a conscious and deliberate choice. Number 3 is an involuntary human act. It is an act done through coercion, under threat of death to yourself or a loved one. Number 4 is an act of man. It is a reflex action. Number 5 is a voluntary human act. No matter what music and literature say about people who can't help falling in love, experts unanimously agree that falling in love involves some sort of choice, whether intellectual or emotional, and a decision to entertain these thoughts and feelings and acting on them. Number 6 is an involuntary human act. It is an act done also through coercion, although not by another person, but by the environment. How many did you get right? I hope you did well. In any case, you can rewatch this video or contact your subject teacher for clarifications. The following are the reference materials used in the creation of this video. This is the end of Lesson 5, Freedom and Responsibility. Thank you for watching and see you in the next lesson.